It's Friday, February 27th, 2026, 5:01 p.m. Eastern Time. In a converted Pentagon conference room, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth stares at his watch. The deadline has passed. On the other side of the country, in San Francisco, Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei has just delivered the most defiant message any tech executive has ever sent to the American military. We cannot, in good conscience, accede to your request. The request? Strip away every safety guardrail from Claude, one of the world's most advanced AI systems. Remove the restrictions that prevent mass surveillance of Americans. Eliminate the safeguards that keep AI from autonomously deciding who lives and dies. And if you refuse, we'll destroy your company. Welcome back to Mindcast. I'm your host, Will. If you listened to our previous episode, The Iron Helix, you know how we got here. You heard about the Pentagon's radical transformation into the Department of War, their embrace of Elon Musk's unfiltered Grok AI, and the birth of what they call wartime AI. You learned about the AI acceleration strategy that explicitly rejected responsible AI in favor of unconstrained algorithmic lethality. Well, today we're diving into the explosive consequences of those decisions. Because here's what happened. The Pentagon's embrace of Grok didn't just give them their ideal wartime AI, it created the perfect storm for conflict with every other AI company that still believed in safety guardrails. And at the center of that storm stands Anthropic, the company that built Claude to be the most safety-conscious AI in the world. What we're witnessing is nothing less than a foundational battle over who controls the ethical boundaries of the most powerful technology of the 21st century. By the end of this episode, you'll understand three critical insights: how the Pentagon's tech defense oligarchy created the conditions for this crisis, why Anthropic's refusal represents the biggest challenge to military authority in Silicon Valley history, and what this standoff means for the future of democratic control over artificial intelligence. This isn't just a contract dispute. This is the moment we decide whether AI serves humanity or whether humanity serves AI warfare. Let's dive in. To understand why Anthropic found themselves in the Pentagon's crosshairs, we need to go back to that moment I described in our last episode, when Secretary Hegseth declared that Department of War AI will not be woke. Remember, this wasn't just rhetoric, this was operational policy. The Pentagon had made a calculated decision to embrace AI systems stripped of ethical constraints, and Grok became their poster child for what wartime AI should look like. But here's what we didn't fully understand then. This decision created an immediate problem. While xAI's Grok provided the philosophical alignment the Pentagon wanted, it couldn't provide all the technical capabilities they needed. Grok is powerful, but it's relatively new. The military still needed access to the most advanced AI models available, models like Anthropic's Claude, which had capabilities that even Grok couldn't match. So they kept their existing contracts with the traditional AI companies, thinking they could simply force those companies to remove their safety restrictions. And initially, it worked. As we learned from the leaked documents, when the Pentagon demanded that AI companies agree to all lawful purposes language in their contracts, most of them quietly capitulated. OpenAI and Google, facing the prospect of losing massive defense contracts, essentially said, whatever you need. They were willing to strip away their self-imposed ethical guardrails to maintain access to those lucrative defense dollars. But Anthropic was different. The company had been founded on the explicit principle of AI safety. Their entire corporate identity was built around developing AI systems that wouldn't cause harm. Claude wasn't just a product for them. It was a philosophical statement about how AI should interact with the world. And when the Pentagon came calling with their new demands, Anthropic essentially said, "This is where we draw the line." Now, this might have remained a quiet standoff, But then something happened that turned the entire situation into a crisis. And this brings us to our first key insight: how a military operation in South America exposed the fundamental contradiction in the Pentagon's AI strategy. In January 2026, U.S. Special Operations Forces conducted what President Trump called one of the most complex, spectacular feats of military competence and power in world history: the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro in Caracas. According to Venezuelan officials, this operation involved bombing across the capital and resulted in 83 casualties. But here's what made this operation historically significant from an AI perspective. For the first time in military history, an advanced AI system provided real-time decision support during active lethal combat. That AI system was Anthropic's Claude. According to Wall Street Journal reporting, Claude processed vast amounts of signals intelligence and mapped infrastructure vulnerabilities to assist special operations teams during the raid. This wasn't Claude sitting in a back office analyzing documents. This was real-time tactical support for a live military operation that resulted in human casualties. And here's the crucial detail: this happened without Anthropic's direct oversight. How was this possible? Remember that ecosystem we discussed in the last episode? Those tech defense oligarchs who have become the bridge between Silicon Valley and the Pentagon? In this case, it was Palantir Technologies, Peter Thiel's defense contractor, that served as the intermediary. Anthropic had a partnership with Palantir that allowed Claude to be integrated into classified platforms, and Palantir deployed Claude in the Caracas operation without requiring explicit approval from Anthropic for that specific mission. When Anthropic discovered that Claude had been used in a lethal military operation, they were furious. The company's usage policies explicitly prohibit deploying their models to facilitate violence. They immediately confronted Palantir, demanding assurances that their bright red lines regarding autonomous weapons and surveillance would be respected going forward. But the Pentagon saw this protest very differently. From the Pentagon's perspective, Anthropic's complaint wasn't a legitimate ethical concern. It was an unacceptable intrusion of civilian corporate values into sovereign military operations. Here was a private company essentially trying to veto military decisions in real time. And this exposed the fundamental problem with the Pentagon's strategy of relying on civilian AI companies while demanding wartime AI capabilities. The Pentagon realized they had a critical vulnerability. What if Anthropic decided to revoke access to Claude during an active military operation? What if other AI companies followed Anthropic's lead and started imposing ethical restrictions on military use? The Department of War, operating under their new doctrine of wartime speed, couldn't accept the possibility that civilian tech executives in San Francisco could arbitrarily interrupt the kill chain based on their subjective moral calculus. This brings us to our second key insight: the unprecedented ultimatum that followed, and why it represents the most dramatic confrontation between Silicon Valley and the Pentagon in modern history. On Tuesday, February 24, 2026, Secretary Hegseth summoned Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei to the Pentagon. The meeting was described as cordial in tone but uncompromising in substance. Hegseth's demand was simple: Anthropic must grant the U.S. military unfettered access to Claude for all lawful purposes, permanently stripping away the company's usage policy constraints. No more restrictions on mass surveillance. No more prohibitions on autonomous weapons. No more ethical guardrails that could interfere with military operations. And he gave them a deadline: 5:01 p.m. Eastern Time on Friday, February 27th. But what made this ultimatum truly unprecedented wasn't the demand itself, it was the threats that accompanied it. The Pentagon didn't just threaten to cancel Anthropic's $200 million contract, they threatened to weaponize the entire federal procurement system against the company. First, they threatened to designate Anthropic as a supply chain risk, a label historically reserved for foreign adversaries like Huawei and ZTE. Think about what this means. A supply chain risk designation would effectively blacklist Anthropic from the entire defense industrial base. Any company that does business with the military, from Lockheed Martin to Amazon Web Services, would be legally prohibited from using Claude in their systems, or they'd risk losing their own federal contracts. It's economic warfare designed to destroy a domestic American company for refusing to eliminate AI safety protocols. But the most legally controversial threat was the Pentagon's plan to invoke the Defense Production Act, a Korean War-era law that grants the president broad authority to direct private industry during emergencies. Secretary Hegseth is reportedly threatening to use this Cold War statute to compel Anthropic to fundamentally alter Claude's underlying architecture, neural weights, and safety parameters against the company's will. Legal scholars are calling this unprecedented. The Defense Production Act was designed to make steel mills prioritize tank armor and force factories to produce ammunition. Using it to compel software developers to dismantle AI safety protocols raises profound constitutional questions about compelled speech and government overreach. It's a legal frontier that could redefine the relationship between the state and private technology companies.
So why is Anthropic willing to risk total destruction rather than comply? Their resistance centers on two non-negotiable principles that they argue are fundamental to constitutional democracy. First, no mass domestic surveillance. Anthropic argues that a powerful AI capable of analyzing billions of conversations simultaneously could be weaponized to gauge public sentiment, detect pockets of disloyalty forming, and stamp them out before they grow. That's essentially a recipe for a surveillance state that would make George Orwell's 1984 look quaint.
Second, no fully autonomous weapons. And Anthropic has a chilling technical argument for this position. Current AI models, including Claude, are inherently probabilistic machines. They're highly susceptible to hallucinations, data fabrication, and what researchers call prompt injection attacks. In a civilian context, an AI hallucination might result in a flawed email. In a military context, an AI hallucinating a hostile radar signature or misidentifying a commercial airliner as a threat doesn't result in a software bug. It results in kinetic escalation and potential war crimes. And here's a fact that should terrify anyone thinking about AI-controlled weapons. A 2026 study by Kenneth Payne at King's College London tested leading AI models, including Claude, in complex geopolitical crisis simulations. The results were deeply unsettling. Across 21 simulated games involving 329 decision points, at least one tactical nuclear weapon was deployed by AI in 95% of scenarios. 95%! These models demonstrated a rapid willingness to escalate conflicts, entirely lacking the human nuclear taboo that has prevented atomic warfare since 1945. Accidental escalation occurred in 86% of conflicts, indicating that AI systems tend to intensify each other's actions in high-stakes environments. For Anthropic, providing the Pentagon with Claude stripped of safety guardrails for integration into autonomous weapons systems would be tantamount to releasing an unstable, escalation-prone actor into the most sensitive national security environments. This brings us to our third and most important insight: what this standoff means for the future of AI governance, democratic institutions, and global stability. Because this isn't just about one company's refusal to cooperate with the military. The resolution of this crisis will establish fundamental precedents that will shape how we manage AI development for decades to come. First, consider what this means for the AI industry itself. If the Pentagon successfully forces Anthropic to comply through economic coercion, it sends a chilling message to every technology company. Prioritize military utility over safety protocols, or we'll destroy you. This could bifurcate the AI industry into two distinct tiers: sovereign military AI, models like Grok, stripped of guardrails and optimized for warfare, and civilian commercial AI, models constrained by safety frameworks for public and enterprise use. But here's the irony. By threatening to destroy the most safety-conscious AI company in America, the Pentagon is essentially handing dominance to those tech defense oligarchs we discussed in the last episode. Remember, xAI's Grok already operates with minimal ethical constraints. If Anthropic is forced out of the defense market, it leaves companies like Palantir, SpaceX, and xAI with even more concentrated power over America's military AI infrastructure. This creates what analysts call key person risk on an unprecedented scale. The military would be trading diversity in AI suppliers for a consolidated oligarchy of techno-patriots who happen to align with current political leadership. But what happens if these relationships sour? What happens if Elon Musk decides his interests diverge from America's? The Pentagon is essentially granting a few powerful billionaires unprecedented geopolitical leverage over America's cognitive infrastructure. The global implications are even more dangerous. The United States has historically been the world leader in establishing norms for responsible technology deployment. If America publicly abandons ethical constraints on AI warfare to achieve military acceleration, it dismantles any moral authority to demand restraint from Beijing or Moscow. Other nations will interpret the coercion of Anthropic as definitive proof that major powers intend to preserve maximum operational freedom regarding AI warfare. Remember China's military-civil fusion strategy that we discussed in the last episode? Beijing has been criticized for blending civilian tech companies with military applications. But now they can point to America and say, you're doing exactly the same thing. You're forcefully fusing your commercial AI capabilities with your military machine, so why shouldn't we? This could kill momentum toward international agreements governing autonomous weapons, sparking a race to the bottom where safety testing is discarded for rapid, unconstrained deployment. So what does all this mean for you and me? Let me give you 3 concrete takeaways that extend far beyond this specific crisis. First, this conflict is establishing the precedent for how democratic governments will control AI development. If economic coercion succeeds in forcing Anthropic to comply, it becomes the template for government control over any technology deemed strategically important. Today, it's AI safety guardrails. Tomorrow, it could be encryption standards, social media algorithms, or any other technology that governments want to control. The principle being established is that national security concerns can override corporate ethical standards through economic force. This creates a new form of industrial policy where military needs directly influence how civilian technologies are built and who controls their behavior. If this approach spreads to other domains, it could fundamentally alter the relationship between government and technology in democratic societies. Second, we're witnessing the birth of what we might call weaponized AI governance. This isn't just about buying AI systems. It's about fundamentally reshaping how these systems are built, who controls their behavior, and what values are embedded in their operation. The Pentagon isn't just demanding compliance with their requests, they're trying to alter the fundamental architecture of AI systems to serve military rather than civilian priorities. Third, and perhaps most importantly, this standoff is a preview of the AI alignment problem writ large. Right now, we're arguing about whether Claude should refuse orders for mass surveillance or autonomous weapons. But what happens when AI systems become truly superintelligent? What happens when the stakes aren't just military contracts, but potentially existential outcomes for humanity? The principles being established now, whether AI systems can be forced to act against their programming, whether governments can compel compliance through economic pressure, whether safety can be sacrificed for capability, these principles will shape how we handle far more powerful AI systems in the future.
As I record this, that Friday deadline has come and gone. Anthropic has refused to capitulate. Dario Amodei issued a public statement declaring that his company cannot, in good conscience, accede to their request. The Pentagon now faces a choice: carry through on their threats and risk a high-profile legal battle that could tie up their AI initiatives for years, or find a compromise that preserves both national security capabilities and constitutional principles.
But whatever happens next, this confrontation has already changed everything. We've crossed a threshold where governments are willing to use economic warfare against domestic technology companies to achieve military objectives. The Department of War's integration of Grok, which we explored in our last episode, was just the beginning. This ultimatum to Anthropic is the next chapter in a story that's still being written. We're living through the moment when we decide what kind of AI-powered future we want to build. Will we live in a world where military efficiency trumps ethical considerations, where governments can force private companies to dismantle safety measures through economic coercion, where the most powerful AI systems are designed for war first and civilian use second? Or will we find a way to balance national security with constitutional principles and global stability? The resolution of this crisis will set the definitive precedent for AI militarization for decades to come. And that decision won't be made just in Pentagon conference rooms or Silicon Valley boardrooms. It will be shaped by public opinion, congressional hearings, court decisions, and ultimately by citizens who understand what's at stake. That's all for today's Mindcast. This story is still developing, and I'll be following it closely. I want to hear what you think about this unprecedented showdown. Are you Team Pentagon, believing that national security requires unleashed AI capabilities? Or are you Team Anthropic, arguing that some ethical lines should never be crossed, even in warfare? Head to our website and let me know. Share this episode with someone who needs to understand what's really at stake in the age of artificial intelligence. And if you missed our previous episode about how we got here, the Iron Helix, the strategic, technical, and ideological drivers behind the Department of Defense's integration of xAI's Grok, go back and listen to that first. These stories build on each other, and understanding the full picture is crucial. Remember, the future isn't something that happens to us, it's something we actively choose to build. Until next time, keep questioning everything.